The chair of a parliamentary inquiry examining the bank's lending practices to primary industries says it's expecting a wealth of public submissions from WA. The national inquiry is set to probe the regulation and practices of financial institutions with those in the agriculture, fisheries and forestry industries. To date, there's been more than a dozen inquiries into financial institutions and practices in Australia. Committee Chair, One Nation Senator Malcolm Roberts said they're looking for witnesses from across the country. And the ABC's Sarah Talia spoke earlier with Senator Roberts and asked what he knew about the concerns in WA.
Well, we know there's a lot of concern in the rural industries, especially in farming, but also in fishing and forestry because of the loan practices of the banks. And we've had quite a few farmers commit suicide over these practices. And there have been a lot of associated practices, well, not essentially in the banks, but connected with the banks through various other service providers in the financial sector that have been very troubling. And just the level of concern and the depth and the breadth of the concern across the rural sector.
So you're chairing this inquiry. What do you hope it achieves?
Well, what we want to do is to understand what the problems are. And then we want to also learn about people's solutions or possible solutions, and then based on that make some recommendations. We have already started calling for written submissions, and then we'll be taking verbal submissions and then calling for witnesses around Australia.
And so have you had a chance to have a look at any of the submissions so far?
No, not yet. They only just started to be called, and what will happen is the committee secretariat will go through them, and then according to the terms of reference, set them aside for us to then look at.
And what type of submissions and from what type of industries and areas are you expecting?
We're expecting a lot from Western Australia and Queensland, because especially in northern Queensland, because we understand that's where a lot of the problems have come from, Sarah. But all over the country. And we'll also we are writing formally to institutions, lending institutions, financial institutions, inviting them to make submissions. But we're particularly interested in getting submissions from people who have borrowed money from the banks or from other financial institutions, people in the rural sector, fishing, agriculture, farming.
And so there was the joint committee inquiry into the impairment of customer loans that wrapped up, although the report was handed down last year. Does this inquiry any way follow on from that?
At the moment, I'm not going to speak on behalf of all the committee members yet. We've only had one formal meeting, and so I just speak on my own behalf at the moment, Sarah. And we know there have been 17 inquiries into financial institutions and financial practices. I don't know the time span of that, but that's a lot of inquiries. And for some reason, these practices are continuing. So we're not going to be trying to follow anyone else's formula. We've got a few ideas among the committee members for doing things quite a bit differently to really get to the bottom of the problem.
So you mentioned those 17 former inquiries. What are your hopes that this inquiry will be any different?
Well, we want to be able to identify what the real problems are. And we also want to be able to then to identify solutions that we can make recommendations based on those solutions. And we want perhaps to be able to come up with some quick measures that can be put into place, because these farmers and others in the rural sector are really doing it tough.
And so that submission period is open until May 8th. Why would you be encouraging people and institutions to be sending in their submissions?
So that first of all they can have their say as to how to tighten up or how to make the lending practices in the rural sector fair and honest, because we've heard quite a few complaints that the lack of fairness, the lack of honesty. So if they have got a problem with anything to do with rural lending, then we need to hear from them so we can understand their problems, and then perhaps we'll be able to call them and to actually, when we visit around the country, we'll be able to actually listen to them and get more of an understanding through our questioning and listening to better understand the problems. And then we'll be putting financial institutions in the position to be able to give witness as well.
And just finally, you mentioned that you'll be collecting information, obviously gathering information from around Australia. Where do you anticipate the public hearings will be held? Not specific locations, but are you expecting in each state?
I don't know about all states, but I'm guessing so far, certainly in Queensland and Western Australia. It depends upon the level of number of complaints we get from various regions. What we're hoping to do and what our intention is is to go and listen to people in the regions themselves. You know, agriculture tends to be regional, fishing tends to be regional, forestry also regional. So we'll be listening to those areas. We'll probably also be, depending upon the submissions we get, we'll probably also be listening in major provincial cities and also capital cities. As I said, it all depends upon where the complaints come from, and then we'll go to those people to listen to them.
There we have it. Senator for One Nation, Malcolm Roberts, speaking with the ABC's journalist Sarah Talia, talking about that inquiry.